So I love birds, have always been a fan of birds, but I'm going to be 100% honest with you. I don't necessarily identify as a bird watcher. It feels very intimidating, even more so to say I'm a birder. So I prefer to say I'm a bird observer. And in part, I say that because my partner's a bird watcher and a birder, Deb Neidert. She leads trips occasionally, and so some of you might know her. But she's much more of an avid birder, can stand outside and probably, like many of you, identify all the species that are singing at once. One time we were outside, and I said, I just don't know how you can identify all of them by just listening. And she said, well, it's like going to the orchestra and the symphony, because we go to the orchestra quite often. And she said, you know, when the oboe's playing, you know it's the oboe. When the rest of the instruments are playing, I do not know that it's an oboe playing. So I think that's a gift, and those of you who bird by ear, I'm wickedly impressed. But one of my favorite birds, a lot of my favorite birds are wading birds, in part because I really am an observer of birds. I like to watch them for a long period of time and recognize what they're doing. And so because of that, I love wading birds because they're slow, like those warblers y'all like bouncing around everywhere. So the first poem I'm going to read is titled Body of the Great Blue Heron. Body of the great blue heron, mostly gray, body of morning, body to hold the torrent of water and still land, body with gravity and flight, and who doesn't love a contradiction? Body of neck, length of a snake, body with a dagger for a bill and barrel for torso. What do we hold in our chest? Blood in an exhale we can't let go, memory and muscle, a whole body of breath. Heron's got a body of hollow bones. What lives inside that space? Is that where the soul lives, in whatever cavity it can find? Is that our soul when we're alone that thuds in the chest against the breastbone? Heron's body, a feather and fringe claw, is a body beside a colony of bodies who prefers to forage alone. Body of fresh water, body of salt, body with legs disappearing underwater. The heron will defend its feeding territory, throw its wings open, tilt its head back, point its bill toward sky, and stretch itself as large as it can, a body of belief. It will lift with one flap of its wings, carry its body through the body of sky. Thank you. Thank you very much. You're more than welcome to clap after each one, but you don't have to. So one thing I love about writing after being out in the field, whether a lot of times I'm just hiking, right, and I stumble upon birds. I'm not one to chase them, and I'll tell you why in a moment. But one thing I love after is to go home and write about them, because sometimes I think pointing the camera outward and observing that which is around us also allows us to point the camera inward in some capacity. And so when I'm writing sometimes about I hesitate from using the word natural world. W.S. Merwin once said that using the term natural world is a little dangerous because it then separates us from that world. And we are very much a part of that world and need to be good stewards of it. But when I'm out in nature, writing about it later, sometimes because I'm trusting musicality when I write, it's a poet thing, sometimes difficult content can pop up. And so this next poem has a little bit of heavy content in it, but it's also a poem where the title of it goes into the first line. So it's titled Where the Goldfinch. Where the goldfinch sits at the thistle feed and shudders her call toward the branches of trees, all bone against bone, alive as summer, though the green's long gone to winter. I'm 16 in the hot tub on the patio. He says, move closer to the jets, and stumbles on about God's gifts. Will I study that goldfinch's call, learn to match the rhythm, to no longer long, to leave the body and fly to the branches, sing so quietly, the song fades instead of crashes. So this next poem, years ago, Sally is here, Sally Deems Morgan, who's also a wonderful writer. There was a yellow rail that y'all have this secret society where you're like, psst, hey, there's a bird, go see it, you know. And there was a yellow rail that was very visible. And my partner, Deb, got notified that this yellow rail was out in the open and easy to see. And I think she had seen a yellow rail by that time, but was intrigued, so she went out to go see it anyway. But everyone failed to mention that this yellow rail was injured. And Deb came home in tears. And, well, I did what I often do when something feels heavy. I wrote a poem about it to try and make some type of beauty out of the pain. So this next poem deals with a yellow rail that Deb went to see, and I didn't see it, but it sounded really painful in many capacities. So this is called Because of Beatitude. A bird can only fly so long after injury from a mower. Once tight-beaked in a camouflage of weeds, now it flies for everyone to see, flawlessly, with its yellow chest and white patch at the back of its wings, until it tries to land but fumbles upward again, and we see its legs are gone, little stubs of pink. Can you imagine the yellow rail's final landing? Does the bird fly as high as it can just to quit and plunge to the ground? Or does it die there, in air, one last trusting beat of its wings? Of course, the death of the bird isn't the point. The point has to be the bird's life, what it saw, and who saw it while flying so blessedly damaged. I think Deb cried for days after seeing that. Did any of you see that? Did any of you witness that? I read that at the, I was reading with J. Drew Lanham, which is how I think Larry heard of me, I think, because I read it the biggest week with Drew, and I read that poem, and I think there were a lot of people in the audience who had been there, and so I looked up and just tears, because I think it was really painful for a lot of the people who saw it. And most of the audience I'm reading to are not birders. I often joke you're my most intimidating audience. I read to the Kirtland's Bird Club not long ago too, and I feel like, whew, as a poet, you know, there are plenty of poets. Who's ever read a poem where the bird is identified incorrectly? Has that happened? I shared a poem by a great poet not long ago, and he mentions a goldfinch going into a cavity because that's where he nested. Yeah, I'm seeing your head nods. I knew it too. I'm married to a birder, and I have the privilege of being married to a field guide in some capacity, and I thought, oh, I really want to share this poem because it was a remarkable poem. And I thought, I wonder how long I share this on social media before one of Deb's birding friends attack. I think it lasted a day. And someone said, a goldfinch doesn't nest in a cavity. Surely they're talking about a prothonotary warbler. But I accidentally, last week or the week before, said to a group of birders, they were talking about a yellow warbler. And everyone in the audience went, no. And I went, what's the other yellow one? So prothonotary warbler is what he was talking about. But I do think there is a very important value of when we're, for the poets, for us to identify correctly, in part because when we don't know a bird's name, and I know there's so much controversy going around naming right now in the birding world, and I said I wasn't going to talk about it, but here I am talking about it. I think that there's value in the renaming of birds. I'll just say that now. But I also think that there's such importance in knowing the name of a bird, because if we don't know the name of a bird, if we can't identify it, we can't identify its story. So this next poem mentions a blackpoll warbler. And if I didn't know this bird was a blackpoll warbler, I probably wouldn't have bursted into tears after I got to see one that was banded. And it was banded 3 years prior. And if there are folks who don't know what a blackpoll warbler is, when I'm speaking to the Audubon Society, I'm sure you do, but flies from South America, please correct me, South America all the way to the boreal forest, correct? And so to see this bird up close was very moving. So this next poem is titled, a ridiculously long titled name, At the Black Swamp Bird Observatory Banding Station. Warblers squirm silent when caught in mist nets, then peck at the hands of the ornithologist who says, we shortchange the migration tale. He means we leave out the struggle, lack of stopover habitat, windmills, buildings, jaws of a house cat, and only a small percent of birds arrive on breeding grounds. And what of our own migrations? The boxes stacked by walls, smell of cardboard and sweat, the empty desk, our bodies that remind us they're our only home. How lonely we are inside them. How little we know of them. Moments we look in a mirror as if to study a stranger. At the Black Swamp Bird Observatory, among the leaf out of trees that green, the marsh pressed against Lake Erie, the ornithologist bands and releases a blackpoll warbler to the clean back of morning. It lifts the sky to join a winged stampede on a journey toward its next temporary home, while we save what we can of the marsh, of our own tired bodies. I'm assuming most of you have been out to McGee, right? To that area? Stunning. So Deb and I have a camper where McGee Marsh is right behind us, and Lake Erie is right in front of us. So we're really, really fortunate. So if it's ever raining and you're at McGee and you have my number, you can call and come over, and we call it the TV. So we lift the blinds to look out, and we'll look out the window, calling it our TV. I'm going to skip that poem. So one of my favorite things to do is to be able to call Deb and say, or Sally, or any of the other official birders that I know. I'll call and say, I don't know what I'm looking at, but because I'm about to make another cardinal sin confession in front of a bunch of birders, I don't always have binoculars on me. I know, it's terrible. But I love watching how birds act, and it's part of how I identify. And then eventually someone's nearby and I say, can I borrow your binoculars? I need to get over it and carry my own. They're so expensive, though, to get quality ones, you know? But nonetheless, I like calling Deb and saying things like, hey, I'm in Tampa, and I was out there for poetry, and I said, I'm over by the beach, and there's a blue heron, but it's not a blue heron, and it's acting like it's on bath salts or cocaine or something. And legitimately she goes, oh, I know what you're looking at. Who knows what I was looking at? Nailed it. Because they do. Have any of you seen a reddish egret before? They are like not the chill blue heron, right? Like they're like running up and down the shore, and then they're like stop, they're their wings open. So one time I called her and said, I don't know what I'm looking at, but he's climbing up the tree and then dropping down like a leaf. So this book has a series of poems called Genesis, and they're spread throughout the book. So Without a Field Guide is in part me being in the field without a field guide, and then also in part feeling as if life were something that I was not given a field guide for. And so there's this kind of dual narrative running throughout the book. But this poem, Genesis 6, mentions a bird that well, it's a brown creeper, right? That climbs up and then drops. And I was in a writing residency down in Georgia, but Deb was very perturbed that I was seeing this bird because of the migration time or something. I don't know. She's like, it's a brown creeper, but I don't know if it's a brown creeper because of the time of the year. She didn't realize my elevation, and apparently that has something to do with it and its migration path. I don't know. So Genesis 6. I'm tucked so far in the mountain, I forget I'm on a mountain. The trees are too close. I can't see the horizon. I study the edges of myself against the edges of trees and shrubs that line the gravel drive I drove to arrive here, a trunk full of yesterday's longing. In secret, I unpack them. In secret, I studied their histories, then met their needs and set them free. Who am I in this beginning? A brown creeper spirals the trunk of an oak, reaches the top, and clumsily drops like a leaf to the base of the next tree. It starts its climb again. Its camouflage body could be mistaken for a knot on a tree, but it can't stand still. It's too hungry. My past is down the mountainside, swallowed by fog, and it doesn't need me anymore. I stop looking for an overlook. Bend down, knees in the dirt like prayer. Watch an ant carry a leaf across the trunk of a fallen tree. A green flag waving me on, saying go, though I don't know where. So I'll read just a few more. This next one, it's titled Wing in the Freezer. Okay, who in here, because I don't get this opportunity very often to like read to a group of birders, but who has dead birds in their freezer? I'm seeing some head nods, yes, right? So our friend was the curator and ornithologist at the Cleveland Natural History Museum. And one time, a former grad student of mine, I used to teach at Kent State, a former grad student was dog sitting for us, and she called me and she said, everything's fine with the dogs, but I thought you guys were vegetarians. And I said, we are, we don't eat birds. Those are going to the Natural History Museum. So this poem's titled Wing in the Freezer. To understand desire, be Angerona in Rome, one finger over your mouth. Her statue was found in a shrine for the goddess of pleasure. By the way, there's a wing in my freezer. It's April and I'm in Ohio taking photos of snowdrops. Snowdrops are early spring flowers, small balloons of white hanging from leaves. In my dream, I was voluptuous. Good morning, pleasure, or good morning, pleasure. And Garona lifted her finger from her lips and told me a secret. I promised to keep it, but I'll share this. When desire and pleasure meet, stars connect like the streetlights I pass when I drive to assist in the after-death migration of birds. Grass to freezer to Natural History Museum. I forgot to tell you, it's a blue-winged teal wing pinned to cardboard, and it's next to a flicker and finch found dead in the grass by the road. A hunter friend killed the teal in season, ate it, then gave me the wing. I'm vegan, but he knew I had a freezer of berries and dead birds. The birds are for science, the berries are for me. I don't feed the dead, but last night I spoke with them. It brings me so much pleasure to read to birders. It really does, because so this poem was picked up by, so poems, when you publish a book, a lot of times poems were published individually in journals, which most people outside of poets don't read, right? Like if you think about the last time you picked up a poetry journal. But it's really fabulous to read to birders, because when this poem was submitted to a couple of journals, you get a gazillion rejections as a poet. But the first journal that rejected it said, and it found a home eventually at Columbia Journal, but the first rejection said, you're repeating the word wing because I said blue-winged teal wing. I said, no, The teal is the bird, you know. And they're like, it doesn't make sense to say there's a teal. And I'm like, oh, do your homework, lazy poets. So I'll read two more poems. I've actually never read this poem to a group, but since we're so close to the McGee area and in Lake Erie, you all know the value of that land there, land that there's not enough of. So I think that our advocacy and doing what we can, as that one poem said, to save what we can of the marsh is so vital. So I'm so thankful your organization exists, and I would love to support in any capacity that I'm able. So thanks for having me. So this poem's titled What Remains. There is a song that's quoted in here. I will not be singing for everyone's safety. So right after I sing a church song he taught me, I'll have some quotes, but I won't be singing. So, what remains? Near the edge of Lake Erie, a common tern skims the shoreline for small fish. Behind me, the marsh is golden with buds of green. Migrating warblers flutter their wings with urgency. I sing a church song he taught me. Mountains bow down and the seas will roar at the sound of your name. If waves are mountains, they burst when they bow to shore. The water is dark blue, blue like the hallway outside the sanctuary where he once pulled me to his chest, and I played a game of reaching around the girth of his body. The hair of his goatee scuffed the side of my neck, and he whispered something, but the speakers crackled the sermon, and then he grew hard between us. Today, I want to find sand to learn how to burrow. But I keep noticing the distance between me and the place where flocks of birds decide this is the day to leave. I list what I see and know. Lake Erie, song sparrow, pine siskin, the way a whisper fades across decades. I cling to a stone before skipping it, watch it bounce across water and sink. Who hasn't skipped stones while watching birds? So this last poem I wrote in February, as the title suggests. I'm curious, like, as birders, while I have a captive audience, who has gone out looking for specific birds and you had it in mind, I'm going to go see this bird, and you get out there and the damn thing isn't there? And so, yeah, plenty of people are going, yeah. But then, who's had that moment where you give in to the beauty around you anyway, right? And I think that maybe that's what I was trying to go for in this poem, because I came home. Well, I had this thing, it only lasted halfway into February, because Ohio in February, as we know, is torturous. And my plan was to go out at dawn every day and just see what I found, but it was cold, so I didn't make it halfway through the month. But here we go. This poem, and this is the last poem I'll read, and then we'll bring some other people up here, ask some questions, we can have a conversation. But you all have been fabulous listeners. Thank you for having me again. Field notes in February at dawn. What you hoped to find, what you longed for and couldn't let go. Pink and purple sunrise over a frozen lake where deer stand below the Scotch pines, highlighted by snow, won't be here, won't wake you into wonder. Instead, a cloud cover low enough it grazed the tops of trees as dawn ends and light begins to slide onto the frozen landscape. The way you opened yourself to yourself until you realized you arrived where you didn't know you needed to be, but knew it was right because you could breathe. Strange how change happens so slowly, you forget you're noticing the colors of green against the white of snow, the first chirps of a dark-eyed junco, sign of waking life, sign of singing what you didn't know you knew. Thank you. Whew, I made it. You birders are intimidating. Well, thank you again so much for being here tonight and taking a risk on poetry. And for those of you who brought a poem, I really appreciate it. If you end up purchasing a book, I'd like to somehow get at least $5 of every book to your organization for sure. So.